It was a cold night in New York City, but the ballroom of one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels glowed as if it were the center of the world. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceiling, casting golden reflections over polished marble floors. Round tables were covered with white silk cloths, adorned with rare flowers and shining silver cutlery. Everything screamed wealth and perfection. And in the middle of all that, there she was. Adriana walked in carrying a bucket of water and a cleaning rag. Her blue uniform revealed her position instantly, invisible to everyone, important to no one. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun. Her face showed the fatigue of an endless week of work, but her eyes still carried a fire that no hardship had managed to extinguish. She wasn't there as a guest. She was there to clean, to make everything sparkle so that others could shine. While straightening chairs and checking every little detail of the setup, she sighed deeply. Her children were miles away, sleeping in their small apartment in Newark. Miguel, only 7, was probably dreaming big, and little Sophia, just 4, slept hugging the rag doll Adriana had sewn herself. She had kissed their foreheads before leaving, swallowing the lump of longing in her chest. Working that night wasn't a choice, it was survival. The rent was late, bills were piling up, and Sophia needed a medical appointment she couldn't postpone. Cleaning luxury parties on weekends was her only way out. As Adriana wiped the spotless floor, her eyes wandered around the ballroom. She couldn't help but think, how could so much wealth be displayed in one place while she struggled to buy milk for her children? The contrast was brutal, yet it also made her dream. Because Adriana had a secret. No one in that room knew. But her body remembered stages. She had once danced in academies, felt music flowing through her veins, and imagined a life as a ballerina. Dance was her hidden passion, suffocated by a hard reality that forced her to choose paid bills over fulfilled dreams. Now, holding a rag in her hands, it seemed impossible to believe that this woman once dreamed of being a dancer. Yet when the orchestra upstairs began tuning their instruments, Adriana closed her eyes for a moment. The sound mocked her reality, but at the same time lit a spark deep inside her. What she didn't know was that this night in New York wouldn't be just another night of work. It would be the beginning of something that would change her life forever. Adriana moved silently across the ballroom, polishing glasses and adjusting silverware. To anyone watching, she was just another cleaning lady, someone blending into the background, someone who didn't matter. But inside her chest, her heart beat with a rhythm that no one there could hear. Because Adriana carried a secret life, one hidden from the wealthy guests who would soon fill that room. When she was a teenager, back in Brazil, she had been called a prodigy. Her dance teacher, a strict Russian named Petrov, used to say, "Your technique is precise, but what makes you special is that your soul dances with you." She remembered the long hours in the studio, the blisters on her feet, the smell of resin on the wooden floor, the thrill of spinning until she lost herself in the music. For a while, it seemed like the world would open its doors. Adriana had even earned a scholarship to study ballet at a prestigious academy. She still remembered the letter, the way her hands trembled when she opened it, and how her mother cried tears of pride. But life had other plans. Her mother's illness, bills that never stopped coming, and eventually 2 small children who depended on her for everything. Dreams, she learned, didn't pay rent. They didn't buy food. They didn't heal a sick child. So, Adriana buried that part of herself deep down. She traded point shoes for cleaning supplies, late-night rehearsals for late-night shifts. But sometimes, when her kids were asleep and the apartment was quiet, She'd slip on an old pair of worn ballet slippers, close her eyes, and dance in the living room. No stage, no spotlight, just her and the music in her head. And tonight, in this golden palace of luxury, she felt the same pull. As the orchestra upstairs played a few notes to rehearse, her body responded almost without permission. Her shoulders straightened, her steps softened, her breath caught. For a fleeting second, she imagined herself not in a uniform, but in a gown. Not as a servant, but as the star. But then she shook her head and forced herself back into reality. That world wasn't for her anymore. Not here. Not now. Still, she couldn't stop the whisper inside her heart. Maybe, just maybe, the dancer in me isn't gone. Maybe she's just waiting. Little did Adriana know, someone would soon see her in a way no one else had for years. And that moment, whether blessing or curse, would expose her secret dream to an entire room full of strangers. The ballroom was nearly ready. The candles flickered in crystal holders, casting soft shadows on the golden walls. Waiters in black and white hurried in and out, carrying trays of champagne, while Adriana remained in the corner, polishing the last set of glasses. And then, the music started. Not just background noise, not a rehearsal anymore. The orchestra began to play. It was the Blue Danube Waltz, the very same piece Adriana used to dance to in her tiny apartment when the kids were asleep. That song was her escape, her secret ritual. Her hands froze around the glass she was holding. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. The notes floated through the air, delicate yet commanding, wrapping around her heart. She glanced around. The ballroom was empty of guests. They were still upstairs enjoying cocktails on the terrace. Only a few workers bustled about, too busy to notice her. Her chest tightened. Something inside her whispered, "Just one step. Just for yourself." Adriana set the glass down, placed the rag carefully on the table, and closed her eyes. Her feet began to move, slowly at first, tracing invisible circles on the polished marble floor. Then her arms rose gracefully, as if they were answering the music's call. The blue uniform she wore suddenly felt like a gown. The empty ballroom transformed into a grand stage. She spun once, then again, her movements fluid, precise, natural. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Every turn, every extension of her arms carried the weight of years of silence and sacrifice. For those 3 minutes, she wasn't the cleaning lady. She was the ballerina she had always dreamed of being. If anyone had walked in, they would have seen something extraordinary, a woman who seemed to float, who commanded the room with nothing but her presence and the music. Her face softened, her eyes sparkled, and her heart pounded in rhythm with the orchestra. And yet, she thought she was still invisible. What Adriana didn't realize was that she was no longer alone. At the far end of the ballroom, leaning casually against the doorway, stood a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile. His eyes glinted with something that wasn't admiration. It was amusement. Gustavo Ribeiro, the millionaire whose name was printed on every banner of the foundation hosting the gala, had just entered. And what he saw wasn't beauty. It wasn't talent. He saw an opportunity. For a few seconds, Gustavo Ribeiro stood in the doorway, watching. His head tilted slightly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. A cleaning lady? Dancing in his ballroom? The stage meant for New York's elite. At first, his expression was unreadable. But then, slowly, a smirk spread across his face. Not the kind born of admiration or joy, no, it was sharper, darker. The kind of smile a predator wears when he spots prey. Adriana twirled, lost in her own world, her eyes closed. She didn't notice him. She didn't hear the mocking clap that suddenly echoed through the vast room. Clap, clap, clap. The orchestra stopped mid-note, startled. Adriana froze mid-turn, her body stiffening as her eyes flew open. The sound of applause wasn't warm. It was sarcastic, cutting. She turned her head toward the entrance and saw him. Gustavo Ribeiro, billionaire real estate mogul, the man who's funded the gala, the one whose reputation for cruelty was whispered about across Manhattan's high society. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the marble floor. "Our cleaning staff is quite talented. Who knew?" His words were soaked in sarcasm, and yet they echoed with authority. Within seconds, heads began to turn. Some guests had already started trickling in from the terrace, curious about the commotion. Murmurs rose like a wave of gossip crashing against the ballroom walls. Adriana's cheeks burned. She stepped back instinctively, clutching at the hem of her uniform as if it could shield her from the eyes now fixed on her. "Oh, don't be shy," Gustavo continued, striding confidently into the room. His polished shoes clicked against the marble, each step deliberate, each step meant to remind everyone of his power. "You were dancing so beautifully just now. Why don't you give us a little performance?" Laughter trickled through the crowd, first soft, then growing bolder. Some whispered, others outright chuckled. It wasn't admiration, it was mockery. Adriana's throat tightened. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. "Sir, I was just working," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Working?" Gustavo threw his head back and laughed. "No, no, no. What you were doing was pretending. Pretending to be something you're not. Pretending to be more than the uniform you're wearing." The words sliced through her. She wanted to run, to disappear, but her legs felt glued to the floor. And then, with a flourish, Gustavo pulled a crisp bill from his wallet, large enough to make the crowd gasp. He held it up for everyone to see, like a prize in a cruel game. "Tell you what," he sneered, "dance for us, right here, right now. If you impress me, this is yours. If not, well..." He paused, his eyes glittering with malice. "You'll never work another event in this city again." The room fell into a hushed silence. The wealthy guests leaned forward, hungry for entertainment. The waiters stood frozen, torn between duty and disbelief. All eyes burned into Adriana, waiting to see if she would crumble or rise. Her hands trembled, her lips parted, but no words came. She could feel the weight of humiliation pressing down, threatening to suffocate her. And then, deep in her chest, something shifted. She lifted her chin ever so slightly. Her eyes no longer looked at the bill in Gustavo's hand, they locked onto his instead. For the first time that night, she wasn't the one being hunted. The silence in the ballroom was unbearable. Dozens of eyes pierced through Adriana, weighing her down like chains. The bill in Gustavo's hand gleamed under the chandeliers, but it wasn't money she saw. It was a trap. Gustavo's smirk widened. "What's wrong?" he taunted. "Stage fright? You had no trouble twirling around when you thought no one was watching?" His words dripped with venom, meant not just for her, but for the audience he knew was hanging on to every syllable. The laughter began again, a low ripple across the crowd. It was cruel, like the hiss of snakes in the dark. Some covered their mouths with champagne glasses, pretending to whisper, but their mocking eyes betrayed them. Others didn't even bother hiding their amusement. Adriana's cheeks burned hot, but inside her chest, her heart pounded with something more than humiliation. Rage. Not wild, not reckless, but controlled, like fire locked inside a furnace. I was only cleaning, sir," she managed, her voice trembling. "Cleaning?" Gustavo repeated, drawing out the word as though it were the punchline of a joke. "No, my dear, you were fantasizing, playing ballerina in my ballroom." He paced slowly around her, the way a wolf circles prey. His shoes echoed with every deliberate step. And then, louder, for the entire room to hear. "So, let's make this interesting. Dance for us, right here, right now. And if you do, you'll walk away richer than your week's wage. If not," his tone hardened, "I'll make sure every event organizer in this city knows you don't belong. You'll be blacklisted. Invisible. Forever." The gasps were audible this time. Even the orchestra shifted uncomfortably, some musicians exchanging nervous glances. They knew this wasn't entertainment. It was cruelty dressed up as spectacle. Adriana's pulse thundered in her ears. The thought of being blacklisted was terrifying. She depended on these jobs to keep her children fed, to keep a roof over their heads. Losing this work meant losing everything. But then the image of Miguel and Sofia flashed in her mind. Miguel with his boundless dreams, Sofia with her fragile health and bright smile. The weight of their future pressed against her like a hand on her back, pushing her forward. She straightened her posture, her trembling hands slowly becoming still. The whispers of the crowd grew louder, sensing a shift. They were ready for her to break, to cry, to flee. But instead, she took a deep breath. "If I'm going to dance," Adriana said, her voice clearer now, cutting through the room, "then I'll dance to something worthy." The maestro, stunned, hesitated with his baton. "And what would you like us to play, miss?" Adriana's gaze didn't falter. Her eyes burned with a mix of fear and defiance. "The most difficult waltz you know." A murmur rippled across the ballroom. Guests leaned forward, intrigued now, no longer simply amused. The cruel game was turning into something else, something unexpected. Gustavo's smirk faltered just slightly. For the first time, he wasn't entirely in control. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The chandeliers sparkled, but the silence beneath them was heavier than stone. Every pair of eyes, wealthy guests, curious staff, even the orchestra, was locked on Adriana. Her words still hung in the air. "The most difficult waltz you know."
Help! She could feel her pulse in her wrists, in her throat, in her temples. She wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows and pretend none of this had happened. But then, Miguel's voice echoed in her memory. "Mommy, you're the most beautiful when you dance." And Sofia's little hands clapping in delight whenever Adriana twirled in their tiny living room. Her children didn't see a cleaning lady. They saw a dancer. Adriana drew in a sharp breath, grounding herself in that thought. She lifted her chin, her spine lengthening as if years of training had just surged back into her body. Every lesson, every late-night rehearsal, every correction shouted by her old teacher Petrov returned like ghosts of discipline and passion. The crowd murmured, restless. Some whispered bets on how quickly she would embarrass herself. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Nobody truly expected her to succeed, but something about the fire in her eyes unsettled them. And then there was Gustavo. From his seat in the front row, his smirk had returned, but this time it looked forced, almost brittle. He had wanted a joke, a spectacle to laugh at with his friends, but now, watching Adriana stand taller, stronger, he felt a flicker of unease. The maestro raised his baton. Adriana closed her eyes. In that single instant, before the first note, the entire weight of her life pressed against her. The sacrifices, the hunger, the exhaustion, the heartbreak, all of it condensed into a single moment. "Don't fail," a voice whispered in her head, but another louder voice rose above it. "Dance." The baton came down, the music began, and Adriana stepped forward. The first notes of the waltz echoed through the ballroom like ripples on still water. The violins soared, the cellos hummed beneath, and the piano struck chords that vibrated against the marble floor. Adriana inhaled sharply. For a split second, her body froze, caught between fear and instinct. The crowd waited, restless, some smirking, others curious, all of them expecting her to fail. But then her foot moved. One step, then another. smooth, controlled, as if the years had never passed. Her arms rose in perfect alignment, her posture straightened, and her body flowed into the rhythm like it was born for this moment. Gasps echoed around the room. At first the audience thought it might be luck, a fluke. But as Adriana spun gracefully, each movement seamless with the music, they realized this was not the clumsy fantasy of a cleaning lady. This was art, pure, disciplined, powerful art. Her fear began to dissolve with every turn. Her uniform still clung to her body, but in her mind, she was no longer wearing it. She was back in a leotard, back in a studio, hearing her teacher's voice echo, "Precision, Adriana, passion, let the music lead you." And she did. Her spins grew bolder, her leaps stretched wider. She glided across the marble floor with elegance that contradicted her station, her struggles, her 15 years of silence. Each movement carried not just technique, but pain, resilience, and hope. The crowd fell quiet. The laughter had died. Whispers of mockery were replaced by stunned silence. Even the waiters, who had tried to keep working, stood frozen, their trays trembling in their hands as they watched. At the center of it all was Gustavo. His smirk had vanished, his jaw clenched as he watched her glide, her turns flawless, her timing impeccable. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, heat crawling up his neck. This was not the spectacle of humiliation he had planned. This was something else entirely, something he could not control. Adriana felt it too, the shift in the room, the energy, the respect that hadn't existed moments before. And with that realization, her courage surged. Her body moved faster now, demanding more of itself. She executed a perfect series of turns, her arms slicing the air with precision, her legs extending with strength. The musicians, inspired, played with greater passion, as though feeding off her performance. And then came the most difficult sequence of the waltz. The crowd leaned forward, breathless. Would she risk it? Would she dare? Adriana's eyes blazed. She dared. The tempo of the waltz quickened, the violins slicing through the silence like lightning. Every eye in the ballroom was locked on Adriana. She was no longer the woman in a blue uniform clutching a rag. She had become something else, something untouchable. Her body flowed with impossible grace. She leapt into the air, landing in a perfect arabesque, her arms curved like wings. Gasps filled the room. A few guests even applauded instinctively, silenced only by the weight of the moment. Adriana didn't hear them. She wasn't dancing for Gustavo. She wasn't dancing for the wealthy crowd with their champagne glasses and jeweled gowns. She was dancing for Miguel, for Sofia, for every night she had sacrificed her dreams so they could live. Her turns grew faster. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Each spin was flawless, controlled, as if the marble itself had become her stage. Her chest rose and fell with the music, sweat glistening under the chandeliers, but her expression was serene, almost divine. The orchestra, swept into her rhythm, played with more fire than ever before. Even the maestro's eyes shone with pride, recognizing a true artist standing before him. Meanwhile, Gustavo's smirk had dissolved completely. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles white. He had invited ridicule, but instead he was watching his own downfall unfold in front of 500 witnesses. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "She's incredible. Where did she train? This isn't a maid. This is a professional." Every movement Adriana made told a story of pain, of survival, of resilience. Each leap was defiance. Each turn was hope. Each extension was a declaration, "I am more than what you see." And then came the most dangerous part, the 16 fouettes, a sequence so demanding that even seasoned ballerinas feared it. The ballroom fell into a hush. Guests leaned forward, breathless, as Adriana took her position, her arms extended, her chin lifted, her eyes burning with determination. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. The crowd gasped. 4, 5, 6. The musicians themselves faltered for a moment, caught in awe. 10, 11, 12. still flawless, her legs slicing through the air like a blade. By the time she hit 16, the entire ballroom erupted. People leapt to their feet, clapping, shouting, unable to hold back their admiration. Adriana ended with a perfect bow, her chest heaving, her eyes glistening, not with tears of shame, but with victory. For a moment, there was silence. Then applause thundered through the ballroom, rolling like a storm. And in the middle of it all, Adriana stood tall, a cleaning lady no more, but a star reborn. Yet while the crowd celebrated, one man sat frozen. Gustavo Ribeiro, his face pale as marble, his pride shattered as the entire room turned not toward him, but toward the woman he had tried to destroy. The ballroom thundered with applause. Men in tuxedos clapped until their hands reddened. Women in glittering gowns shouted, "Bravo!" as if they were at the Metropolitan Opera. Even the orchestra stood, their instruments held at their sides, bowing slightly in respect to the woman who had just turned humiliation into art. Adriana's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Her uniform clung to her skin, damp with sweat, but she stood proud, her eyes lowered in a final bow. For years, she had only danced in silence, in secrecy. Tonight, she had danced for the world, and the world had answered. But not everyone was celebrating. At the front of the room, Gustavo Ribeiro sat rigid in his chair, pale as marble. His smirk was gone, his pride cracked like glass. The bill he had waved so arrogantly earlier now looked pathetic in his trembling hand. He had wanted laughter. Instead, he had been exposed. "Where did she study?" whispered one guest. "She's a genius," murmured another. "This is historic," a critic muttered, already scribbling frantic notes. The crowd began to surround Adriana, showering her with questions, admiration, even offers. But in the middle of the praise, a voice rose above the noise. "Mr. Ribeiro," said Dr. Helena, a respected philanthropist seated in the front row, her tone like steel. "You promised she would earn your money if she impressed you. Do you still doubt what you just witnessed?" The room fell quiet. All eyes turned back to Gustavo. He swallowed hard, his face flushed with humiliation. His usual weapon, mockery, was useless now. If he refused, he would look even smaller. If he obeyed, he would kneel to the woman he had tried to break. Adriana met his gaze for the first time. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any insult. Finally, Gustavo rose from his chair. With trembling fingers, he pulled a billfold from his pocket, not just the original moot, but several crisp bills, and laid them on the polished floor at her feet. But Dr. Helena wasn't done. "You also said something else, Mr. Ribeiro." Her eyes narrowed. "If she danced, you would clean the very floor she graced. Do you plan to keep that promise?" The audience gasped. Dozens of phones were already recording. Gustavo's humiliation was about to be immortalized. He froze. His pride screamed to resist. His reputation begged him to run. But the weight of 500 eyes was merciless. Slowly, reluctantly, the billionaire sank to his knees. A hush swept over the ballroom as he picked up a rag, her rag, and pressed it against the same marble floor where Adriana had just triumphed. The crowd erupted again, this time with laughter, not cruel laughter aimed at Adriana, but the cathartic roar of justice finally served. And for the first time, it wasn't Adriana who was humiliated. It was Gustavo Ribeiro. The sight of Gustavo Ribeiro on his knees, scrubbing the marble floor with Adriana's rag, would live forever in the memory of everyone present. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. What was meant to be her humiliation had become his downfall. Adriana stood still, her chest rising and falling, her mind spinning. She hadn't planned this, hadn't asked for it. She had only wanted to survive the night. But now, her life had shifted in a way she could barely comprehend. The applause rose again, not just polite clapping, but a wave of thunder that shook the chandeliers above.
People surged forward, surrounding her, offering congratulations, business cards, promises. A famous critic from the New York Times pushed through the crowd, his voice trembling with excitement. "You," he said, gripping her hand, "you are not just a dancer, you are an artist. This city needs to see you on stage." Tears welled in Adriana's eyes. For so long she had danced only in secret, in the quiet corners of her life. Now the world was demanding to see her. Over the next weeks, everything changed. Invitations poured in, dance companies called, benefactors offered to sponsor her return to the stage. For the first time in years, Adriana allowed herself to dream, and this time, to dream out loud. 6 months later, the lights of the Lincoln Center burned brighter than ever. The marquee carried her name, Adriana Ferreira, a night of waltzes. The theater was sold out. Inside, the audience buzzed with anticipation, critics seated with pens ready, her children in the front row, their eyes shining. Backstage, Adriana adjusted the tutu of deep blue and silver, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from gratitude. Behind her stood Dr. Helena, smiling warmly, whispering, "I told you, talent like yours cannot stay hidden forever." The curtain rose. As Adriana stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted before she even moved. Miguel shouted, "Go, Mummy!" and little Sophia clapped her hands so hard they echoed above the crowd. Adriana's heart swelled. She took her position. The music began. This time, there was no Gustavo to mock her, no weight of shame pressing her down. There was only light, only freedom, only the fulfillment of a dream resurrected. Every leap, every turn, every gesture was no longer just dance. It was a testimony to survival, to resilience, to the truth that no uniform, no humiliation, no arrogance of the rich could erase who she truly was. And when the final note struck, the ovation shook the hall. 15 minutes of standing applause, flowers raining onto the stage, her children shouting her name. Backstage, among the bouquets, she noticed a simple arrangement with no card, just one word written on a folded slip of paper: "Forgive." It was from Gustavo. Adriana held it for a moment, then placed it aside. She didn't need revenge anymore. She had won. Her new life had begun.